Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, a question that's plaguing me at the moment. Should I read Brandon Sanderson? So I don't know about all of you, but I'm someone who is very easily influenced, particularly when it comes to books. So if I see a particular book or even a particular author being talked about repeatedly on BookTube by people whose opinions I respect, then over time my defences will be worn down and I will find myself wanting to read that book or that author's work, even if it was something that my initial reaction to had been lukewarm. And that is definitely happening for me at the moment with the author Brandon Sanderson. So if you don't know, Brandon Sanderson is a very successful American author of fantasy books. In particular, he's got a lot of press recently for publishing books on Kickstarter, but he's, most of his work's been published more traditionally. Best known for the Mistborn series, I think, but also finished off the Wheel of Time series that was started by Robert Jordan. Quite a big deal in modern American fantasy. And I was initially lukewarm to him because I don't really like fantasy books. So I've gone on record on the channel before, made a video about the fact I'm not a big fan of like fantasy and sci-fi, particularly where there's a load of world building, which I find just tends to distract me from the actual story and the characters. So because of that, I tend to be less inclined to want to read fantasy fiction. However, at the moment, I'm reading The Forgetting Moon by Brian Lee Durfee, a fellow booktuber, and I'm really, really enjoying it. And that's reminded me of all the fantasy books I've read, in the past, particularly when I was in my teens and early 20s. I read a fair bit of fantasy and did enjoy it. And The Forgetting Moon is reminding me of the pleasure of that kind of adventure story, which I, have in the past really enjoyed and am really enjoying at the moment with The Forgetting Moon. And I keep on, since I started reading The Forgetting Moon, I keep on seeing people talking about Brandon Sanderson on their channels. So Nick from another BookTube channel talked about him. Even Gina Stania, who's not someone I would associate with reading like big fantasy novels, recommended or had really enjoyed a Brandon Sanderson book recently. And that's made me think, well, maybe I should give him a try. There's a couple of things, in particular with Sanderson's work, outside of fantasy more generally, that are definitely a turn-off for me. So one is the fact that I think pretty much all his books are set in the same universe, which is called the Cosmere. So you get this big kind of universe building beyond world building, universe building. And the idea of like stepping into that universe at the wrong point and being completely lost and not understanding what's going on worries me a bit. I'm always fearful of books where there's a kind of additional stuff you need to know going into them, if that makes sense. So that is definitely giving me pause for a bit of reservation. And I also know that Sanderson is really, his books are very much about kind of magic systems and things like that. And that to me feels like world building, feels like complexity that I don't want to have to process when I'm trying to enjoy a story. So that's giving me a bit of pause as well. There's two other things that are giving me pause. So one is a lot of the people historically who I've seen like praising Brandon Sanderson and really enjoying his books have been people who also really like the Dresden Files books. And I read this one, Stormfront, the first of the Dresden Files books last year, and really, really didn't enjoy it at all. And in my mind, the kind of storytelling style of Jim Butcher, that kind of very fast-paced fantasy style of storytelling, is, I think, similar in style to Brandon Sanderson. So that's giving me a bit of pause and making me think maybe Sanderson isn't for me. The other thing is I recently last year started trying to read again Battlefield Earth by L. Ron Hubbard. So I read this book when I was a teenager, in fact like when I was quite a young teenager, when I used to really enjoy fantasy, and I remember having a really good time with it. Second time around, as a 50-year-old, well, you can see how far through it I got. I really was not enjoying this book. Brandon Sanderson is a huge fan of this book. So there's a video you can find on YouTube where he like praises it to the heavens and says, what a fantastic book he thinks it is, and I think he says it's has been an influence on him as well. So if he really likes this book and I really don't like this book, should that should that be a red flag in terms of me wanting to read him? So I'm still very much on the fence. I looked on my Kindle, and naturally, because I buy Kindle books with complete abandon, I've got 3 Brandon Sanderson books that I haven't read on my Kindle. So I've got his first 2 books, which is probably a good place to start. So I've got Elantris, which I think is a standalone, and then I've got The Final Empire, which I think is the first in the Mistborn series. So Elantris was his first book, Final Empire I believe was his second book, and then I've also got The Way of Kings, which is the first in, I forget the name of the series, but the first in another series by him. So I've got what look like good jumping off points already to read Brandon Sanderson, but I'm still really, really not sure. So do let me know in the comments. This video is not me telling you something, it's me asking you if you've read Brandon Sanderson, knowing my reading taste and taking into consideration what I've said in this video. Do you think I should give Brandon Sanderson a try or not? So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.